Welcome. I am author D.M. Patterson, and in this video, I'm going to talk about a book, Black Elk Speaks, written by John G. Neihart. I wanted to provide a little context for how I came about reading this book. I was getting to know a new coworker named Gavin, and he told me that he and his girlfriend Des loved reading. And I immediately wanted to know what kind of books they read and if they had any recommendations because I love reading too. Unfortunately, he said that he and Des enjoy reading horror, which is one of the genres that I avoid. But Gavin told me that there was a book that he read that was a horror story that was written so well that he still recommended it, even though I don't enjoy horror stories. He thought that the writing would be powerful enough that it would still be a book that I liked. The book recommendation was Stolen Tongues by Felix Blackwell. So I downloaded it on Audible because I don't really have a whole lot of time to sit down and read, but I listen to Audible books when I walk, when I am cleaning the house, when I'm going to work, when I'm driving, pretty much anywhere. And this is not sponsored, by the way. But I was able to get through it pretty quickly because it's a fairly short story, and also I was very, very invested in the story. I will say that it is still pretty horrifying, and there was a lot of times where my anxiety was spiking. And I don't read horror stories because I have a lot of anxiety, but the writing was very good, and I really wanted to know what was going to happen. And there is also a prequel to that, to Stolen Tongues, which is called The Church Beneath the Roots. And you don't necessarily have to read them in order. You don't necessarily have to read The Church Beneath the Roots, but I appreciated the book so much and I appreciated the writing and the topic that I ended up also reading The Church Beneath. Well, I ended up listening to The Church Beneath the Roots. This video is not a review of those books, but I do want to say, as an author, encouraging other authors out there, that I was given a book recommendation based on the writing and how well written the book was. And I took a chance. Even though the genre is not my favorite, I took a chance because who doesn't love a good book recommendation? And I liked it so much that I ended up reading the prequel to that book. So whatever you're working on, whatever that project is, if you're feeling a little doubt that maybe the genre is not the most popular out there, it's not maybe the one that's trending right now, keep going, keep writing that story because you never know. You never know who's going to pick it up. You never know who's going to enjoy it. Write that story if it's what you're enjoying and if it's the genre you want, keep going. And that's another great thing about good writing is potentially even bringing awareness to a topic that you may not necessarily have dug into in the past. The stories that Felix Blackwell writes about center around the Rocky Mountains and the Native American reservation. It has a lot of mythological and spiritual terror to it. As you may be able to guess from the first story called The Church Beneath the Roots, there's some spirituality in it that is pretty scary. And Felix brings in, I think, a lot of this is where the Native Americans were kind of pushed to off to the side and slammed into this reservation. There was a clash of what these people believed in, and they were also uprooted from where they called home and how connected they were spiritually to the places that they were, their lands, and where they were living on the lands, and how being swept away from that is part of the frustration and sorrow they have. Felix Blackwell brings up a lot in a very short amount of time. And I really like that Felix does not smack his readers over the head with this is what white man has done with the Native Americans and look at what we've done. It's not very on the nose, but it's still very powerfully stated in the way he tells his story. I read the afterword where Felix talks about how he did a lot of research and he wanted to do justice to the Native Americans and not treat them like caricatures in a story, which again is another reason why I do appreciate these stories. And that is another example of really good writing. And I think Felix did a good job, um, and still scaring his audience pretty thoroughly, but there's still a subtle message in there. And that made me, as somebody who enjoys researching things, and I love going down different paths, and I love also diving deep into topics of interest. I started digging around what was going on in the Rocky Mountains and why were the Native Americans pushed aside into a reservation over there, and what was it that happened, what historically was going on, and that led me to Black Elk Speaks. This talks about the history of where the Native Americans ended up and how they are where they are when Blackwell picks up that as a setting for his stories. That's another thing I really appreciate about reading what Felix Blackwell wrote in The Stolen Tongues and The Church Beneath the Roots, is he's bringing awareness about something that really did truly happen in history. And that's another really powerful aspect of writing that authors can keep in mind. Black Elk Speaks is about Black Elk, who is the Native American pictured here on the cover. I did also listen to Black Elk Speaks on Audible, and I'm glad I did because there's a lot of the native language that I would not have known how to say or, say in my head. So it was actually really a great experience for me to listen to it being read. And then I also bought the book because there is a great deal of context. There are some other forewords in the printed copy, as well as some really cool pictures that are in this printed copy that I have that obviously I couldn't see in the Audible version. So I highly recommend, if you really like being able to see pictures and get your hands on more. There's some more context. There's some more notes in here, author notes. This is just more extended from what I listened to. I highly recommend listening to it if you are able to get it on whatever app where they can read it out to you, and then also have the printed version so you can see these really cool pictures and read some more of, there's a whole list of references. There's some more author notes in here that weren't in the Audible. But I wanted to read a few of the passages that really stuck out to me. My point for reading these passages are twofold. One, I think it is extremely powerful narrative. And I say narrative because I believe that Black Elk was speaking and then it was being translated into writing, and then it was translated from writing into English. The second reason I want to read some of this is because I know there are many of you out there who are struggling with writing your own story. And you could be dealing with self doubt. You could be thinking that you're not that important, that nobody would want to read your story. I just want to encourage you, if that is you, to sit down and write it, that your story is important. And writing it is probably going to be very cathartic for you. And I think that you would be surprised at who will end up picking it up and whose lives will be touched by your story. Black Elk is from the Lakota of the Oglala Band, and I'm trying my best to say this all correctly. I know I said I listened to it, but I listened to it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm saying it correctly, so I'm very sorry if I'm butchering it. I had never seen a Wasatch then, and did not know what one looked like, but everyone was saying that the Wasatchus were coming, and that they were going to take our country and rub us all out, and that we would all have to die fighting. When I was older, I learned what the fighting was about that winter and the next summer. Up on the Madison Fork, the Wasatchus had found much of that yellow metal that they worship and that makes them crazy, and they wanted to have a road up through our country to the place where the yellow metal was. But my people did not want that road. It would scare the bison and make them go away. And also, It would let the other Wasatchus come in like a river. They told us they wanted only to use a little land, as much as a wagon would take between the wheels, but our people knew better. And when you look about, you can see what it is they wanted. So Black Elk continues to talk about how the soldiers, the Wasatchus, again, those are the white people, were coming in with their soldiers and they were starting to take the land by force anyway and push the Native Americans away from the land. I'm quite sure that I remember the time when my father came home with a broken leg that he got from killing so many Wasatchus. And it seemed that I can remember all about the battle too, but I think I could not. It must be the fear that I remember most. All this time, I was not allowed to play very far away from our teepee. My mother would say, "If you are not good, the Wasatchus will get you." So this this jumped out at me because the parents are saying that their kids have to stay close to the teepee because there are big scary Wasatchus out there that will get the children. And we have we all can think of times when our parents were saying things like you need to stay close to the home or you need to stay close to the shelter if we were out at a park or something because something big and scary might get you. And as kids, it was just something funny and maybe we didn't really believe that there was anything out there that would get us. But we know now as adults and some of us who have kids and we know the worry of if the kid wanders too far away, something may happen to them. And it's so sad. And also just the painting that picture of what is in the forest that's scary and the beasts that are scary are the white men. Those are the monsters that the Native Americans are afraid of. And those are the monsters that they are telling their children to stay close to them because they will be taken away by these monsters. And those are the white men. Black Elk eventually has a vision that he describes in a lot of detail, and it's very cool. It's a very powerful vision. And towards the end of the vision, he says, "And I saw the sacred hoop of my people was one of many hoops that made one circle, wide as daylight and as starlight. And in the center grew one mighty flowering tree to shelter all the children of one mother and one father. And I saw that it was holy." So in this very long description of the very detailed vision that he had, he's shown this tree of his people and he takes it upon himself. And he understands that this vision was given to him so that he can do his best. And he was given this power by the thunder beings to save his people. And throughout this story, everything he does and every decision that he makes, it's to try to save his people. And he uses this communion that he has with the thunder beings to the best of his ability to make the best choices to save his people. At one point, the people are starving and he is in the woods, and the thunder beings give him a kind of vision that there are bison over on this other side of a hill. And he and a few other people go over to this other side of the hill, and there are, I think, 4 or 5 bison, and they are able to kill the bison and cook them and eat them and to save his people because of it. There's another time where he is camped out in the forest and they have their teepees and everything set up, but he and a few others have kind of scouting away from the teepee for a little bit, the teepee area. They're kind of looking around, seeing what's around them. And the thunder beings give him another warning that there is an enemy band coming upon the teepees. And again, he follows the senses from the thunder beings and he's able to sneak up and see that there are enemy bands coming over to his where his teepees are set up. So he is able to escape from them and go back down to the teepees and get everyone and just run away as fast as they could. And he talks about how the thunder beings created a mist and a storm to cover their trail as they escaped. And he said they escaped very just in the nick of time because then they heard shooting into the teepees, and he guessed that because they left so quickly and they left the teepees up, the enemies that came in thought that they were in the teepees and they were spending time shooting into the teepees, and that was time enough to help them get away. And he thanked the thunder beings for also providing that cover, like the storm and the mist, the cover for them to get away. So throughout this, it's very interesting to see that he is always thanking the thunder beings for their visions, and he is always using it to try to save his people. Later, he says, "For now the thunder beings were like relatives to me, and they had gone away when the frost came and would not come back until the grasses showed their tender faces again. Without them I felt lost, and I was alone, there among my people. Very few of them had seen the horse dance or knew anything about my vision and the power that it gave me. They seemed heavy, heavy and dark, and they could not know that they were heavy and dark. I could feel them like a great burden upon me. But when I would go all through my vision again, I loved the burden and I felt pity for my people." Because they had to keep moving, because the white men were also invading the forest, but then also the other bands that were already there established, there was already inner fighting amongst them. There was a lot of breaking up and coming together of different bands. And not everyone that he was with all the time knew that he had this powerful vision or had seen him perform the dance of the powerful vision that he had. And he didn't want to burden them with that. But he is always feeling this burden and the pity for them as he's watching these Wasachus come and just destroy the land and push the Native Americans away from the place that they called home. Another thing I thought of when Black Elk was talking about his visions was what a striking contrast from the multiple examples we have of white men using their visions to create a cult and to do horrible things to people in the name of religion. Later, he says, "In the spring it got warmer, but the Wasatchus had even the grass penned up. We heard then that we were going to cross the big water to strange lands. They put us all on a very big fireboat, so big that when I first saw I could hardly believe it, and when it sent forth a voice I was frightened. There were other big fireboats sending voices and little ones too. So they got a whole bunch of them together and they sent them to London to perform shows. And they got to meet who he calls Grandmother England, who was Queen Victoria. So Queen Victoria meets them and says, "I am 67 years old. All over the world I have seen all kinds of people, but today I have seen the best looking people I know. If you belonged to me, I would not let them take you around in a show like this." I had lots of thoughts. I had lots of thoughts about that because we all know that England isn't exactly innocent. I think it would be interesting to see the reactions of the people at the time and not commentary on people looking back at it with what we know now, just because that in and of itself would say a lot about how they were viewed, how the shows were viewed, how the Native Americans were viewed. If everyone had this idea that Queen Victoria was saying, like, "Oh, I don't think if I don't think this is right. I don't think you should be um, taken around in a show like this," like she says. But from what Black Elk says, the Native Americans were not treated badly. They were paid, and at one point, Black Elk decides that he wants to go home, and he was given money to go home. So at least it seems like they had a little bit of freedom, and they got some food and pay for what they were doing. So when Black Elk comes home, this is what he says about what he saw. "There was hunger among my people before I went away across the big water, because the Wasatchu did not give us all the food they promised in the Black Hills Treaty. They made that treaty themselves. Our people did not want it and did not make it. Yet the Wasatchus who made it had given us less than half as much as they promised. So the people were hungry before I went away. But it was worse when I came back. My people looked pitiful. There was a big drought, and the rivers and creeks seemed to be dying. Nothing would grow that the people had planted, and the Wasatchus had been sending less cattle and other food than ever before. The Wasatchus had slaughtered all the bison and shut us up in pens. It looked as though we might all starve to death. We could not eat lies, and there was nothing we could do. So, again, the desperation of these people, and especially Black Elk coming back to his people with the power still of the Thunder Beings and that vision that he was given, where he really believed that the Thunder Beings were going to give him the power to save his people. And he came back from the show that he was doing in London to see that his people were just in far worse condition. And throughout, also, he was talking about how a lot of times the people in the bands that he was traveling with, they would decide to go to the Wasatchus because they had no other choice. Either it was go to them and get shelter from them and some kind of food from them, or starve and die in the forests. Black Elk continues, so I dressed myself in a sacred manner, and before the dance began next morning, I went among the people who were standing around the withered tree. Good Thunder, who was a relative of my father and later married my mother, put his arms around me and took me to the sacred tree that had not bloomed. And there he offered up a prayer for me. He said, Father, Great Spirit, behold this boy, your ways he shall see. Then he began to cry. I thought of my father and my brother and my sister who had left us, and I could not keep the tears from running out of my eyes. I raised my face up to keep them back, but they came out just the same. I cried with my whole heart, and while I cried, I thought of my people in despair. I thought of my vision and how it promised me that my people should have a place in this earth where they could be happy in every day. I thought of them on the wrong road now, but maybe they could be brought back into the hoop again and to the good road. Under the tree that never bloomed, I stood and cried because it had withered away. My tears on my face, I asked the Great Spirit to give it life and leaves and singing birds, as in my vision. So here again, Black Elk is crying around a withered tree that they said was kind of like their tree of life, a symbol of their peoples. And so symbolically, but also in reality, what the Wasatchus were doing, penning up everything and digging through everything, they were experiencing a lot of drought, and they were killing off, it's because the Wasatchus were killing off all the bison and things like that. There was so much effect on the environment and the ecosystem. And Black Elk was feeling this very heavy burden, and he was looking around and in despair because he desperately wanted to use the vision that he had and his relationship with the Thunder Beings to save his people. But everywhere he saw, both symbolically and in real life and in nature, he saw despair and no hope. While these things were happening, the summer 1890 was getting old. I did not then know all that was going on at other places, but some things I heard and much more I heard later. When Good Thunder and Kicking Bear came back in the spring from seeing the Wanakia, the Wasatchu at Pine Ridge put them in prison a while and then let them go. This showed the Wasatchus were afraid of something. In the moon of black cherries, August, many people were dancing at No Water's camp on Clay Creek, and the agent came and told them to stop dancing. They would not stop, and they said they would fight for their religion if they had to do it. The agent went away, and they kept on dancing. They called him Young Man Afraid of Lakotas. Later, I heard that the Brules were dancing over east of us, and then I heard that Bigfoot's people were dancing on the Good River Reservation. Also, that Kicking Bear had gone to Sitting Bull's camp on Grand River and that the people were dancing there too, word came to us that the Indians were beginning to dance everywhere. The people were hungry and in despair, and many believed in the good new world that was coming. The Wasatchis gave us less than half the beef cattle they promised us in the treaty, and these cattle were very poor. For a while, our people would not take the cattle because there were so few of them and they were so poor. But after a while, they had to take them or starve to death. So we got more lies than cattle, and we could not eat lies. When the agent told the people to quit dancing, their hearts were bad. So here again, not only do you have the Wasatchus, the white people, coming into the Rocky Mountains because there's gold, they are purposely moving and forcefully moving the Native Americans out of their land. They take all of the Native Americans' weapons away from them, so the Native Americans cannot defend themselves or fight back. So they are pushing the Native Americans away from the land that was theirs and where they grew up and they were nurturing. They killed all the bison and they penned in things like the grass, was just saying that he penned in the grass, but they were also creating ecological dams and things like that, trying to get into the gold. So that was also making a ripple effect on the ecological system. And then the white men come in and try to take away their religion, which is very apropos for white people. The Native Americans were trying to dance and comfort themselves, really. They were trying to, very desperately, trying to find hope anywhere. They were trying to console the fact that they were starving to death. They had lost so many people. Their bands had been torn apart. And a lot of people, if they didn't lose them to the Wasatchus because they starved to death or were killed, they would go to the reservations because that was the only place that they could go in order to survive. And the Wasatchus are coming and trying to take away that last part, that last aspect of who the Native Americans are as well, saying that they can no longer dance. And I like that they call the man who went away the young man afraid of the Lakotas because they're just dancing anyway. The last part I wanted to read from this book is how Black Elk wraps up his story. And so it was all over. I did not know how much was ended. When I look back now from this high hill of my old age, I can still see the butchered women and children lying heaped and scattered all along the crooked gulch as plain as when I saw them with my still young eyes. I can see that something else died there in the bloody mud and was buried in the blizzard. A people's dream died there. It was a beautiful dream. And I, too, whom so great a vision was given in my youth. You see me now, a pitiful old man who has done nothing, for the nation's hoop is broken and scattered. There's no center any longer, and the sacred tree is dead. That breaks my heart. It really does. I wish I could tell Black Elk that I read his story and how deeply sorry I am for what happened. I don't know that it would have done anything, and I don't know if it would have meant anything to him. But I am so glad that he allowed himself to have his story recorded. There actually is a part in here where he said that he did not initially want to have his story recorded because he felt that if he explained the vision that he had, that the power of that vision would be taken from him. But then he ultimately said, well, there's nothing to save anyway, so I might as well tell you my story. And obviously he didn't say it that way, but it really breaks my heart. I only know very surface level information about what happened to the Native Americans here in America. And I'm so glad that a chance book recommendation from my coworker Gavin and a book that he and his girlfriend Des really enjoyed brought me to such a powerful autobiography and something that I could dive into and have more historical, understand more of the historical significance behind what Blackwell writes about. And I can also say that there is a story, and the other people in here that Black Elk talks about, I can say, I see you, I see your story, I've read it, and I have it in my heart now. And I'm truly sorry for what happened to you and to your people. Again, it's such a minor thing. It's really, it feels so silly and so small to say. And not only did I read Black Elk's story, I continued to pass on awareness, and I wanted to put it in this video, and I wanted to talk a little bit about what I came across and spread more of his story and in my own way tell other people his story and encourage you to get a copy of this and listen to it and read it. I'm also wearing a shirt that I got online from Native Spirit. Their mission is to support Native American rights, and that was something I was all for supporting. So I'll put the link down below. I got this shirt, and I also got an ornament to put on the Christmas tree because I thought it was really cool looking. And Black Elk talks a lot about the four corners of the earth, and the ornament is like the four corners, and it's really cool. And having read the book, when I saw the ornament, I could put a little bit more of my own knowledge that I got from Black Elk when I bought it. And that made me feel really good that I had a little bit more knowledge about what I was buying. It's really incredible how the one book recommendation kind of rippled out into this. And I again very much want to repeat what I was saying earlier. I know a lot of you have stories that you want to write. Maybe it's about yourself, maybe it's about a relative, maybe you came across a person in history that you think more people need to know about, but you're stuck in thinking the story is not going to go anywhere, it's not going to impact anyone, why write this story? You never know. You never know who is going to end up picking up that story, whose life is going to be impacted by that story. So I say, write it. But I really hope that this is the encouragement that you needed to get working on that story. Whether, again, it's about you, it's about somebody you love, or it's about a historical figure that you think there's not enough information about about this really cool historical figure. If you have that yearning desire to tell that story, you have no idea who's going to end up picking it up and whose life is going to be impacted by that story. Thank you so much, as always, for watching my video. Thank you for your support and for being there for me. Now, go write.